Welcome, everybody, to our 2024 Center for Faith and Learning Spring Symposium. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We really appreciate your presence and your engagement with this event. My name is Matthew Wilson. I'm, in addition to being a faculty member here at SMU in political science, I am the director of the Center for Faith and Learning, and I'm delighted that we're able to bring this program to you tonight. I think it will be very much an interesting exchange. I want to begin by introducing our two key speakers and participants tonight. First of all, I know that we are very honored in the Center for Faith and Learning to have the Honorable Paul Ryan as our featured guest this evening.
Thank you.
Paul Ryan was elected to Congress in 1998 to represent the 1st District of Wisconsin, which he did for 20 years. And during that time, he did stints as chair of the Ways and Means Committee of the House, as well as the Budget Committee of the House of Representatives. He is, I should say, actually, before I move on about his political career, I should say that he hails from Janesville, Wisconsin, and is a graduate of Miami University of Ohio. So I know that the Miami University folks would want us to get that in there.
Absolutely.
So, yes.
But rooting for Marquette in this tournament. That's right.
Of course, Paul Ryan was in 2012 a candidate for the vice presidency of the United States, and from 2015 to 2019 served as the 54th Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. Since leaving Congress, he has founded the American Idea Foundation, and something, of course, an activity close to my heart, has been a professor, visiting professor at the University of Notre Dame. And that keeps him busy in his post-congressional career. He will be interviewed tonight by Dr. Elisabeth Kincaid, who we're delighted to have with us. Elisabeth got her undergraduate degree at Rice, then got a law degree at the University of Texas, got a Master's of Theological Studies from SMU's own Perkins School of Theology, and then got a Ph.D. in theology from the University of Notre Dame. So clearly she has not spent enough time in school.
My husband thinks that's funny.
Yes. She, of course, like me, I can't criticize, she remains in school, in a sense, in that she's a professor at Loyola University in New Orleans, which she is the Legendre Soule Chair in Business Ethics and the director of the Center for Ethics and Economic Justice. And among other publications, she is the author of Law from Below, which is an analysis of a Jesuit philosophy of law. And so that's a very interesting publication. That was published by Georgetown University Press. I'll turn it over to Elisabeth and to Speaker Ryan in just a minute. But before I do that, I have to first of all give some thanks. And first of all, I really need to thank the Foss Foundation. The Foss Foundation has made this event tonight possible. It is their contribution to the Center for Faith and Learning that underwrites our spring symposia, and we are very grateful to them for making possible our event tonight. I also want to, there are lots of people to thank, but I want to thank in particular my partner in doing things with the Center for Faith and Learning, our chaplain, the Reverend Lisa Garvin, because we could not exist as a center without the support of the chaplain's office and our partnership with the chaplain's office, and we really appreciate all of her work in this regard. I also deeply and sincerely want to thank Jenna Stegmoller, who is our program coordinator in the Center for Faith and Learning, who has done amazing work to bring this program together this evening. And we would not be here, and this event would not be taking place without her extraordinary efforts. And so we're very, very grateful to her for making that happen. We're also very grateful to volunteers from the Mothers and Dads Club of SMU, who are the people that greeted you outside and who have provided a lot of the manpower to make this event roll forward. And so we are really very, very grateful for their support of this event. Finally, before I turn this over to begin, let me say that we are going to have time at the end of tonight's program for question and answer. Now, everybody in coming in should have received a notebook and a pen. So the way we're going to do question and answer this evening is as questions occur to you, if you have something you'd like to ask, we ask you to take a page from your notebook, write it down. At the end of the interview, we will ask you to pass those to the center aisles. And then one of our students and a faith and learning scholar and our student body president, Alex Alarcon, will collect those. And he will go through those. We won't be able to read and ask every question, but he will choose some particularly interesting and insightful questions to pose to our panelists this evening. And that'll be our question and answer at the end of the session. So anyway, hopefully I'll cue you when the interview is over. That's when you can pass your questions to the end of the aisle, and we will collect those. So without further ado, let me turn things over to Elisabeth and to Speaker Ryan.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And I will say, I've been hanging around the Institute of Faith and Learning since it was a twinkle in the former chaplain's, Steve Rankin's eye, and it is amazing to see what's happened under his leadership and your leadership and Lisa's leadership. So just everybody being here tonight is a tribute to the great things you all are doing at SMU. So Speaker Ryan, I'm going to start with an unscripted question that I think is first on everyone's minds when we talk about Wisconsin in Dallas. Do you have any comments you need to make about the Packers-Cowboys playoff game just to clear the air before we get started?
As my daughter Eliza and I were there with my wife and our son, and we sat with a bunch of Dallas fans. And so we really worked hard at teaching humility to our kids that day because that game was one heck of a game. But we taught humility. And, Mike McCarthy's a good man. He's a good Catholic, by the way. I've known Mike for many years. He's your coach. I think he still has a house in Green Bay. And he's sent his kids to a good Catholic school in Green Bay. He's a good guy, but no offense, but I'm really glad we beat him.
Well, we are currently trying to teach our 6-year-old that winning doesn't necessarily indicate virtue. Yeah. So, Dallas is...
Character building.
Right, exactly. Right. Well, let me go on to a more serious question. So, tell us something about your personal faith. Did you grow up Catholic? Did you grow up in the church? Just a little bit of that background.
Yeah, I did grow up. We call it cradle Catholic. I grew up in the church. I went to our local parish school from first grade through 8th grade. I was an altar boy. All my side hustle money were weddings and funerals. As an altar boy, you get pretty good tips doing that. And I was very much just raised in the church, in the fold. My dad died unexpectedly when I was 16. Mm-hmm. And when something like that happens to you, it kind of throws you through a loop, makes you question all of those things. So I guess I'd say I was questioning everything in those days as a young man. And went on my full spectrum journey to come back even stronger, back to my Catholic faith. But I just read everything I could, explored different ideas. My faith got shaken, when it was a sudden heart attack, so it wasn't something we saw coming. And he was 55, so it wasn't, a thing that you typically see as a family. And my mom we had some adversity in those days. So those things make you stronger at the end of the day. And my faith actually came back full circle, quite a bit stronger. Actually, it was through C.S. Lewis. Really wasn't a Catholic guy, but through C.S. Lewis, which really helped me get my faith back stronger than ever.
Favorite C.S. Lewis? What's your favorite C.S. Lewis?
Screwtape Letters. It's been in my briefcase for years. Yeah.
Wow. So, at what point in your political career did you start to see an intersection between faith and politics? Did you go into politics thinking that there was a real connection, or is it something you kind of grew into?
Not really. I thought I was going to be an economist, actually. That my goal in life was to maybe go to Capitol Hill. I was a staffer for 5 years. And my goal in life was to spend time on public sector economics. Then I thought I was going to I want to go to the University of Chicago, get my doctorate in economics, and maybe I'd be like the chief economist at R.W. Baird in Milwaukee or something like that. And along the way, because I mentioned as my dad passed, I always looked toward mentors. And I had this mentor who I worked for, a guy named Jack Kemp. Jack, many of you knew who Jack Kemp was. All the older people in the audience are sure nodding their heads. So Jack was my mentor, and I worked for him as his staff economics advisor. And he taught me a lot. He had this infectious enthusiasm. And he basically taught me that public service is a glorious vocation. You can take ideas, you can advocate for those ideas, be passionate about those ideas, make them real, meaning laws, and see them make a big difference in people's lives. and that is a worthy vocation of pursuing. And so he's the one who sort of convinced me to go home at 27 years old and run for Congress. And I thought to myself, I'm single. I don't have anything to lose. Let's give it a shot. If I lose, so what? And I ended up winning the race. And I spent 20 years in Congress, but it was mostly on economic issues, which is what I'm kind of known for in the committees I'd chaired. But it comes pretty to you quickly, because when you run for office, you're elected based on the principles you have, the positions you take, the party you serve in, all of those things. But there comes a time very quickly, you have to make a lot of independent judgment, and you better have a set of core principles through which you filter those decisions through, that you have to make kind of in a real-time basis on voting on legislation, on amendments, on positions you take. And that is where you clearly have to have some anchor. And faith, for me, was a very important anchor. The good thing for a Catholic is there's like a book on this. You know what I mean? The compendium. It's actually, it's pretty literal. So, and we can get into this, but it's not like you better take this position or this policy and vote. It doesn't work like that. Mm-hmm. We have something we call prudential judgment, which is lots of discretion within these elaborate principles that are important. But so for a Catholic in public life, a person who came strongly back to my faith, I had an operating manual and a roadmap to go to, and some really close priest friends of mine at the time. So it was very helpful to me.
How did you find the compendium? I mean, I try to get my undergrads to read it. So how did you kind of come across that? And
I was invited to this monthly Catholic members' dinner at St. Peter's, which is that's the parish right beside the Capitol. And the pastor there had for all members, Democrats and Republicans, a third Thursday of the month dinner of Catholic legislators. And I just went to it once. I thought it was great, so I just kept doing that. So it helped get me early on in my career. I got elected in 98, just sort of putting this front of mind. Right. And then we had some really good parish priests that, Eliza knows our parish priest, our current, priest, Paul Arinze, this 6'7" guy from Nigeria, is just a very close friend of our family. So I've had just very good, and Tim Dolan, we'll probably get into that. He was the bishop of most of my congressional district. And Tim Dolan is kind of he's the Cardinal of New York right now, so he's the highest ranking Catholic in America. But he was then the Bishop of Milwaukee, which is this congressional district.
Well, let's actually talk about Cardinal Dolan. So one of I think perhaps when people in the broader public really started being aware of the connection for you between your faith and your political career was an exchange you had with Cardinal Dolan about economic policy and about the connection between economic policy and Catholic social thought. So for folks in the room who aren't familiar with Catholic social thought, as Speaker Ryan said, it's a collection of documents that have been issued by the Roman Catholic Church over time, engaging with political and economic issues. So you all had an exchange where he kind of rebuked you for some. Rebuke's probably too strong, but
the rebuke
challenge.
was from a different bishop.
Right.
It was yeah. So there's a guy named Bishop Blair who ran. I forgot the name of the committee. It was a committee we call it the USCCB, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And I was chair of the budget committee in those days. And I was writing these budgets. It sounds corny these days, but I believe we should pay off our debt and balance the budget. And so I was writing federal budgets in those days that did that balanced the budget and paid off our debt, and did it by addressing the drivers of our debt, our entitlement programs, all the things today you have to do to balance the budget, which they say is a political third rail. Both of our presidential candidates are running against doing anything about this. So I passed all these budgets in the House in those days. I did it 4 times, changing these entitlement programs, raising the retirement age, means testing their programs, doing all the things you need to do to balance the budget. And I had this big rebuke from Bishop Blair, who was the head of this social justice committee, from the left perspective, hitting me for a cruel budget. How dare I, as a Catholic legislator, pass a budget like this? Is effectively what he said. So I called Tim Dolan, the president of the Catholic Conference of Bishops, said, "What do you think I should do about this?" He said, "Hit back." He didn't say it in those words. But he said, send me your thoughts and send it to me as the president of the Catholic. So he and I did an exchange of letters. And what Dr. Kincaid was saying is we had this thing we call the social magisterium. And it's all these writings and principles and documents that the Catholic Church has curated over years, which culminate into Catholic social teaching and thought. And there is a compendium for people in public life, lay Catholics, on, here are the principles that you need to be mindful of. And I wrote then a letter and then some speeches and some other op-eds about how I'm applying Catholic social teaching to the problem of debt and deficits and our fiscal imbalance and a debt crisis that's coming, and how I applied that using my prudential judgment. And that's what that exchange of letters was. The past Pope, Pope Benedict, referred to monumental debt as, nations living in truth against future generations. Because I don't want to be preachy here, but the debt we're racking up right now as a government, I see all these young people, all these people who are in college, we are giving you such an enormous amount of debt that is going to make it impossible, if we don't do something about it, for you to have the kind of prosperity that we've enjoyed in our lifetimes raising our families. You're going to have to pay our bills and then pay for your government if we don't fix this thing pretty soon. And so that's been one of my biggest issues I've worked on. And long story short, and we can get into the principles and how they interact with each other. I think that's probably what we're going to get into. Lay Catholics have an obligation to work on these principles, to advance these principles, but within that, there's a huge space for prudential judgment and discretion. A conservative and a liberal can still be good Catholics and still operate within Catholic social teaching and produce their recommendations, their policy ideas. But the thing is to mind these principles. Mm-hmm. And you apply your preference to these principles, but it's important that you mind these principles as you do this. And so that was more or less my response to, here is how I am minding these very precious, important principles that I think are very, very important for lay Catholics in public life, and why and how I am applying them to this particular situation.
Can you talk a little bit about solidarity and how kind of your approach you felt like aligned with solidarity, with the practices of solidarity?
That's a really important principle in Catholic social. And solidarity is a principle most people know the word solidarity. It's had different meanings, labor movements in Poland and the rest. But solidarity effectively means we're all in this together. We are all human beings together in one family with equal human dignity. And the things we do, we want to combine and speak to us as a whole. We want to be conjoined. And one of the things that I think is important, that I think a lot of Catholics have missed, and this is the point I've made over and over, and with Tim Dolan and others, is that there's a twin principle that needs to be conjoined with solidarity, and that's the principle called subsidiarity. Okay, subsidiarity, now I don't want to get too wonky in the Catholic terminology, but subsidiarity is kind of like federalism. It is, you want to make sure that those closest to the problem are empowered with solving those problems. You don't want to take power up to the next level if it can be dealt with locally, in the family, in the community, in the city, in the state, because solving problems and doing the things of humanity, of helping one another in your own capacity is human. That is living. That is good. That's the stuff of life that we want to flourish and nourish and not degrade and take away and move up to some higher level. And so I see the Jesuit priest over here. Slap me down if I get any of this wrong. Because Jesuits do that. They slap you on the wrist if you get things wrong. So sorry. But at least they used to in the old days.
They still do.
Sorry, maybe you lost that part. Yeah. But those things work in tandem with each other. And I think the best of Catholic social teaching, which is we're in this together. We have to be unified in our approaches to solve things for the common good. And we want to empower the closest source to solving the problem. And it makes people better. It makes people better to they themselves getting involved in other people's lives and their communities in making a difference in solving problems. And if the problem is so big that you can't solve it in your family or in your community, then it goes up to the next level, but only then. And that is a very powerful principle where you have solidarity and subsidiarity in conjunction with each other. And by the way, the preferential option for the poor, Very, very important Catholic principle. And when you combine all of these things, you can come up with different opinions on what the best approaches are. I've come up with what I think are the best approaches through public policy using my conservative classical liberal principles. And that's the result of the poverty policies I push. That's the result of the budget policies I push. That's the result of the tax and economic growth policies that I've advocated for. And the good thing is good Catholics can totally disagree with each other on whether this is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. The question is, do you mind these principles as you filter and build your policies and make your decisions?
Can you talk about maybe when, I mean, if, you've clearly spent a lot of time thinking and writing about this and seeing this overlap. When have you changed a political position? Has your faith led you to change a political position that you had, or?
Yeah, as I mentioned, my mom was pretty important in my life. She used to say this to me: you have 2 ears, you have one mouth, use it in that proportion. By the way, it's good advice. I learned that lesson hopefully as a young person. I think of all the issues where faith was kind of an important part of it, I'd say was probably criminal justice reform. When I first came into Congress, it was in the late 90s, and we had a big crime wave that had hit America in the 90s. And both parties were sort of escalating the political rhetoric that happens to be tough on crime. Clinton was president, Biden was vice president, big crime bill. I don't know if you remember those days, but we all voted for really tough on crime bills. 3 strikes, you're out, no mandatory minimums. And gosh, 10, 12 years later, I spent a year with a gentleman named Bob Woodson, an iconic leader of the civil rights movement, one of Jack Kemp's best friends, touring poverty-stricken areas in America, just learning. And a lot of it was with faith people. I spent a lot of time in black churches, a lot of pastors, not as much Catholic, but just non-denominational churches. And the consistent theme that kept coming up to me, touring all these poverty-stricken areas, I did this for 2 years. It was after I ran with Mitt in 2012. I just wanted to get back into understanding it. Was the criminal justice system was taking, it was not working the right way. Actually, this state had done some reforms that were pretty impressive, which we were taking people who made mistakes in their lives, needed to pay their debt to society, but we were locking them away forever. We had disparities on different kinds of crimes, crack versus regular powder cocaine. And what we were learning was there are better alternatives to rehabilitating people, to getting people not to commit crimes again, than throwing them in jail and throwing away the key. So basically, I had kind of a change in heart and a change in opinion. Then I got into looking at the data, and it was really, really clear. So I basically changed my opinion on that issue, pretty much a 180. And a lot of us did at the time, to the point where we started it with when Obama was president, and then we finished it with Trump. I was speaker at the time, where it was hard to do. We muscled through criminal justice reform, which we really overhauled quite a bit of the criminal justice code for the federal government. It's still a controversial issue. People can demagogue the issue, they do. But I'd say criminal justice reform is probably the one where I definitely had a change of heart, just because of evidence and testimony, and changed my position, changed the law.
What's it like as a politician to change your perspective?
Yeah, you get hit for that because, most people you think the coin of the realm in politics is consistency, right? Otherwise, you're a hypocrite or you're a flip-flopper. This is a republic, right? So we elect people to go exercise their prudential judgment in government. It's not a direct plebiscite. It's not a Greek democracy. And that means we elect people to go use their judgment. And if you find circumstances, if you run into facts that are new and you learn things that change your mind, then in this system of government we have, you should exercise that judgment. When you do that, that can leave, it can ruffle a lot of feathers. So I had a lot of people in my party, about half of the Republicans voted for, about half didn't, something like that. And a lot of those of us who did got hit with pretty hard ads saying we're soft on crime and stuff like this. And we can get into the issues, but we overcompensated. No two ways about it. And the Democrats did too. So both parties overcompensated. And there are so many alternatives to long prison sentences, like drug courts and the rest. So many better alternatives that get people to pay their debts, but more importantly, to deal with the underlying affliction. Typically, it's an addiction of some sort, or maybe it's a mental health issue. But dealing with that underlying affliction, a lot of time it's faith. Faith can really help get you out of this. People can rehabilitate much faster, go back to their communities, and their communities are not as devastated then because they lost the breadwinner or something like that. So you basically have to know that you're going to get hit if you change a position, but you have to have the conviction, courage of your conviction to do it. And you have to sort of suffer those consequences. In this case, we crowdsourced enough people that we made this issue, I think, one where we could touch and change the law, where we got it passed. It wasn't easy, but it was, at the same time, it was very bipartisan. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan vote.
Well, talking about bipartisan and talking about people with principles, I think a lot of people came to hear you tonight because they're very concerned about the current state of our politics and look at you as someone who consistently did show principles and showed beliefs, and you've been pretty clear on the record about your thoughts on the current state, particularly of the Republican Party. But I'd like us, you're welcome to talk about that, but I'd like us to think kind of more broadly. I mean, what has happened to us as a country, and what's the way forward? Where's kind of, the hope that you see? Yeah,
I think, everybody, I'm sure everyone has their own opinion on this. No two ways about it. I think, it's just sticking with the Catholic theme, we've always had moral relativism in society, especially in free societies. This idea that there are no fixed truths, my truth, your truth, her truth, his truth, no fixed truth. And that has always been around. And that we have basically accelerated with digitization. So we have massively accelerated moral relativism in society with digital mediums. And the kissing cousin of moral relativism is identity politics. And both parties now practice identity politics. Why? Because it works. It's wrong, but it works. And what identity politics is it's a way of practicing politics where you divide the electorate up into groups. You pit those groups against one another so in such a way that if you do it correctly, successfully, your group is bigger than the other group. I get 50 plus 1% and I win the election. And this used to be like a left thing. This used to be like a Saul Alinsky rules for radicals sort of left thing. Now the right practices it as well. And when you do that with digitization and digital effect, and you have this sort of digitized moral relativism where we live our lives in algorithmically derived cul-de-sacs online with social media, where the incentive structure, the money incentive structure is to polarize. You can get more hits and clicks on anger, envy, and fear than you can on, hope, growth, and opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so you have a society where all the incentive structures and the political incentives and the political practice of the day is pointing toward massive polarization, dividing and slicing and dicing the electorate, and kind of getting us at each other's throats. And that is sort of a manifestation of where we are. I think, I was just talking to some journalists from the Nikkei. I see them in the audience here. I think our adversaries, I'm talking about the tyrants, China, Russia, the non-democratic, illiberal countries, they're making a bet. And they're betting that they can beat democracy in the 21st century, that they can show that these lean and mean autocratic, countries are faster and leaner and meaner, can make faster decisions. Just give up your freedom and your liberties and let me run the place and I can do it fast. They're betting that they'll beat us, that their model is more efficient, and that we're going to self-immolate, that we're going to relativize ourselves as self-immolation, that we're going to be so polarized, we're going to be at each other's throats so much that we're not going to be able to solve problems. We're not going to be able to respond to challenges quickly. I don't believe that. I think we will, but it's going to be a bumpy road between now and then. And they're not without merit in making that claim, because with the polarized society, and forget about Trump and Biden, that's just the moment we're in right now. But before all of that, you have a society online that is dedicated toward polarization. And so the question, this is what everybody should ask themselves, that's why I come to colleges, what can you do about it?
That was
What is
my
there
question.
to do about it?
But what do we do about it?
I mean, look, I wish I had all these answers. I'm not sure what the answer is, other than we need to revive civil society. That space, those intermediary institutions between ourselves and our government where we live our lives, our schools, our associations, our friends, our churches, the stuff of life where we don't have a computer in our hand and we're looking at another human being and we're doing something with them. And more importantly, of all the times when we're getting stuck in these cul-de-sacs, we've got to go and spend time with people who are not like us, who don't look like us, who aren't from where we're from, who don't think like us, who don't act like us. It's extremely important now more than ever that we do that so that we can become fuller people and that we live our lives in real life in civil society, trying to make us more civil and less lives online where you got the separation of the digital medium where you can be less human. And that's the challenge for this young generation. That's all you kids. It's such a challenge that you have, because those of us who are from the X generation on up, we didn't have it like that. Our lives, I mean, when I got elected to Congress, the internet wasn't even a thing. Email was like internal between you and inside your office. So you got to understand, the world you're coming into is so different and so new. We didn't have that. And now you have all this stuff coming at you on your phones, just feeding you the algorithm, your bias. And it's calling truth into question. And this is what I mean when I say relativism. There is a right and a wrong. There are fixed truths. This whole country was built, back to a Catholic phrase, on natural rights and natural law. All of us are endowed by our Creator to certain inalienable rights, before our government was created. We are each sovereign, equally dignified people, and that comes before even government gets started. But the stuff you're getting fed in these electronic mediums, in these online, social media things, is ripping away at that connectivity. So the question is, what are the things we can do in our communities, in our societies, to put that stuff aside and reintegrate with each other and reconnect our lives in a society that works with each other and helps people in civil society? I know that's not really a solution, other than that's what we need to do, and we got to find all the various things that can do that. A revival of civil society.
Right, a revival of almost habits of the heart, building these connections. Well, thinking about this polarization in society and the way that digital media kind of fuels that fire, I think one of the challenges I see as a theologian, and I think most people in this room see as people of faith, or people who are interested in faith if they're here, is that we seem to be instrumentalizing faith, that a lot of political rhetoric kind of uses faith, Christian faith, as a tool to be a slogan on, the number of bad misquotes by C.S. Lewis I see, to go back to C.S. Lewis, on people's Instagram feeds that I say, no, that Lewis didn't say this. But what do you think the role of faith in public discourse should be today? Yeah,
building this temperament, building this community. If it's used as a political weapon, it's used to create some kind of identity politics, and it's used to divide people. It's used to categorize and lump a person into one, to identify with a group, or to misidentify someone outside of the group. That's typically where political people get involved in that stuff. To use an economic construct, this tactic to try and use, I'm not saying all politicians use faith in a bad way. They don't. I'm part of the pro-life movement. That's, I can go into a lot of interesting stories that are really faith-inspired and faith-driven movements. But when you misuse it as a political tool, you're building a game that is a zero-sum game. This is what I'm worried about, the current populism we have today. The current populism we have today is not really a populism rooted in some kind of set of principles or policies. It's just pure populism. In my party's case, it's wrapped around a personality. And that kind of populism gets everybody to think that life is a zero-sum game. I win, you lose. It's a static game. And politics, elections are zero-sum games. There's a winner and there's a loser. We're just talking about, Marquette made it to the Sweet 16. It's pretty cool. I said, look for the Jesuits. The March Madness, that's a static zero-sum game. That's not what life is. Life is a positive-sum game. You can have win-win situations. Not every exchange between human beings in economics among countries is winner-loser. It can be winner-winner. And the problem with using this kind of political rhetoric, this kind of populism, or misidentifying labels like, religiosity, is to put people into a zero-sum game that makes people think that is how life works. That's how I live my life online. If I've got to get my last word in on this social media hit because I win, they lose. I mean, we're making people think all of this zero-sum game thinking, and that's my concern with kind of where our political rhetoric is. And you can sprinkle a little spice of some religious, fervor on there to try and be a legitimizer and misuse these principles. But going back to core principles, whether it's the Catholic social teaching, social magisterium, or just any faith, it's really about how you treat people, how you dispose of issues, how you handle yourself, and how you're civil with one another. And if you do truly follow faith and the faith creeds, you treat one another with respect. And that's hopefully where this ends up if we have more faith in public life versus saying, I'm in this camp or you're in that camp.
Well, I mean, and wouldn't that be transformative if we could all do a better job of that? So we've got a lot of SMU students here tonight, and I imagine some of them, knowing SMU students, are here because they think they might go into politics at some point. What advice would you give a college student who's thinking about kind of the political life?
Yeah, I've talked to my daughter Liza's right here. I've been paying tuition here for 4 years. You think they'd give you a tie?
Right, I was going to say, you did get a tie.
I had to go to the bookstore to buy this tie.
Yes.
Geez, come on. Sorry, yeah.
Get an SMU diploma. What more do you need?
No, but I've talked to Liza and her friends. A lot of Liza's friends are interested in politics. So I've talked to a lot of young SMU students here as a SMU parent. First thing I say, especially if you're early in your college career and it's not too late to switch majors, get an internship, like Hope got an internship on the Hill. Get an internship and see if it is what you think it is. Because politics, by the way, it may not be what you think it is. So what I always tell young people is get an internship on a campaign or in an office where you're actually serving constituents, doing policy, seeing what it's like, or on a campaign and see what it's like to actually get elected. Get that internship, get that exposure, then go back and think, okay, do I want to major in political science? Do I want to go down this path? Do it early enough so that if you you say, this isn't what I thought it would be, I'm going to go study marketing. It's not too late to change your mind within the 4 years, right? Okay, you don't want to, it's pretty expensive here. You don't want to make it a 50-year thing. So that's number one is go see what it's like. Number two, read the basics. Read the philosophical frameworks of these ideas. Go back to reducing things to irreducible primary principles. So read the classics, read the basics, philosophy, economics, political science, and find out where you land on this stuff. Find out what your principles are. Then once you've established that, know that it might change. But have a core, have a basic understanding, a philosophical framework. And then as you interact with people, it's back to the 2 ears and 1 mouth point. Make sure that as you go through life, you make your case based on fact and reason, not on emotion. Don't impugn the other person's motive. And too often in life, I see this. I used to say it was the young that do this. It's people in Congress do this now. They impugn everybody else's motives if they don't agree with them. They're somehow like a bad person, not just I think they're wrong on this issue. And so there aren't good examples being set today. I regret that, but make sure you avoid running into that trap. We have in Congress today, we have legislators and we have entertainers. And on TV tonight, I can swear, if you turn on the TV tonight, you'll probably see the entertainer on TV tonight. But they're in recess right now. But if they're in session, if you drove to the Capitol, you walk around the Capitol at 10 o'clock tonight, the legislators will be in those rooms, sleeves rolled up, working, legislating, negotiating, compromising. And the carnival barkers, the entertainers will be on TV getting hits and clicks. Be a legislator. And what a legislator does is she listens to the other side, absorbs input, tries to put herself in someone else's shoes to see what their perspective is, what they're all about, filters that through her principles that she's so thought through, and then comes up with a conclusion and tries to bridge gaps. The founders gave us a country that requires negotiation and compromise, that expects and insists that different people from different places, from different backgrounds and different parties and different philosophies figure out how to bridge, the gap in this experiment of ours and tackling our challenges. And the more you have that in your mind as your mindset, you'll be a successful legislator. You may not be entertaining, but you'll get more done. You'll make a bigger difference if you do it that way. The entertainers might get famous then rich, but the legislators will have an impact in society. And so see if it's what you think it is. Figure out what you believe in, what your principles and policies are. Debate based on fact and reason, not emotion. And then listen and empathize with the other side. And then that can make you a better policymaker.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, on that note, I've monopolized you and getting to ask all my questions. I think we're at the time where we're going to hand it over to let some of y'all ask questions.
Yes, absolutely. So we want to give all of you a chance, if you want, to weigh in and to ask questions. So as I said at the beginning, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please write it down, pass to the center aisles, and Alex will collect and look at those. And so Jenna, are you collecting those? Okay. So Jenna is in the back, and if you pass those to the center aisles, Jenna will collect those and get those to Alex. While they do that, and while Alex takes a minute to look over those questions, I'd actually like to lead off with a question. And that is, Speaker Ryan, when you were coming to kind of national political prominence, and a lot of people were getting to know who you were, particularly in the context of the 2012 campaign, one of the things that was often said in the media, a little bit of a caricature, I think, was that Paul Ryan is a disciple of Ayn Rand. Right? That was a frequent characterization that was used. And the reason that I raised that is because, of course, Ayn Rand is an interesting figure.
Yeah.
And I know she's someone who you did read when you were young and thought about. And the reason I raised, for those who don't know, Ayn Rand is somebody who her writing and her thought is very much admired in certain conservative circles, certain circles on the right. But Ayn Rand was also a militant atheist.
An objectivist.
Yeah. So she absolutely had no room in her political philosophy for God. So all this is to ask, what do you see as the difference between a conservatism in the secularist Rand
mold it's a great question.
Versus a conservatism that's informed by faith?
So let me just give you a quick political story. So this is one of my urban legends. Anybody who's prominent in politics has an urban legend. This one's mine. So when I was in high school, most people in my age read Ayn Rand books, Atlas Shrugged, Fountainhead, the stories. So I see a bunch of people my age nodding their heads. And I was in Congress. A supporter of mine from Racine said, hey, he's a big donor guy. He said, I just funded this like banquet in this seminar. This guy was a Randian. And it's across the street at the Library of Congress, and the keynote speaker just got sick and bowed out. Could you just please go over and speak to this group at lunch? You please, we're desperate. I'm like, sure. He's like, because I had talked to him, like, yeah, I love the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. I went over, gave a speech that said, I read Ayn Rand when I was young, and it's true. It inspired my love of economics. It's just, those books they really inspired Capitalism, the Unknown. There's a bunch of books she wrote that inspired my interest in economics. It's why I went and studied the Austrians, Mises and Hayek and Milton Friedman and Bob Mundell. But on philosophy, I thought she was totally wrong and bunk. I just don't agree with objectivism, but I thought there were some interesting things. They took that speech and they cut the first part, used that, and the second part, she discarded it. And so that's what happens in politics. You get taken out of context all of the time. And so I had this sort of urban legend that I was a Randian, to the point where Tim Dolan actually called me. He was like, do you really? I'm like, no, this is, So if you're going to paste an epistemology on me, give me Aquinas. Do not give me Rand. So to answer your question, what objectivism, and I read her books on objectivism because I was just, again, back when I was a young kid after my dad died, I read all this stuff. It reduces human interactions down to mere contracts. It is so anti-human in such a strange way that it has serious limitations. But when it comes to defending the morality of free enterprise and capitalism, there's some interesting sustenance there. So you're basically asking me the difference between like a Catholic conservative, person of faith, and basically a rank libertarian is what I think you're sort of getting at, a market libertarian. The difference is the effects on humanity, the effects on human beings. And so I am a person who believes the best, and I spend a lot of my time on poverty policy. It's what I teach at Notre Dame. It's what my foundation's focused on. It's what I do at the American Enterprise Institute, the think tank I'm at. I believe capitalism is by far the best possible system to organize a society and to get people out of poverty. It is the most positive sum games you can get. And so I'm a passionate defender of that, big believer in markets and free markets. But markets unfettered don't always work the way they're intended to work. And so you do have to have structure on markets. And so what a rank objectivist libertarian, the Cato Institute, a good think tank in DC, will say is government has no role in any of these things, in regulating commerce, in squashing monopolies, in tempering, just the free market, because we've really never had the free market, right? The question is, what's the proper level of setting the playing field, of regulating things? That's where there's a big debate, and a good debate between the left and right on it. The difference between a Catholic type of conservative is you use these principles, preferential option for the poor, solidarity, subsidiarity, and markets, and that brings to you a whole different set of problem sets, or a whole different set of solutions to these problems, which oftentimes are incongruent with rank libertarianism. I'm a big believer in the safety net. I've proposed, I'm working on a whole project to modernize the safety net and digitize the safety net to work on reigniting upward mobility in America. I believe we've ignored poverty in this country in a real massive way. Not in the government spends a lot of time on poverty. We can bring people out of material poverty, but I'm talking about the multi-generational kind, the real stubborn poverty, where we have told taxpayers, don't do anything, don't worry about it, you don't have to do anything, government's got it covered, it's a government program. And so we've basically told people through the war on poverty, don't get involved. I think there is a lot of need for people to get more involved in being solutions to solving poverty. Poverty policy, upward mobility poverty, a safety net, that violates objectivism. That violates rank libertarianism. What a libertarian will say is just do universal basic income, call it a day, and get rid of the rest of government. That is, to me, not a good idea. I think you need to integrate with the poor more. I think you need to have a safety net. So the long story short is, a conservative who believes in a moral foundation, in a theological construct, in epistemology like Aquinas, thinks there's limitations to the market, and that there is a proper role for society and for government to play in the betterment of humankind. And what an objectivist will say, no, just the bare minimum. Win the wars, have the courts, call it a day.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Alex, you wanna-
All right. So here I have a handful of questions from the audience.
You just shuffle them up, or you look at it?
Well, I think these will kind of touch on
I'll
the
try and give you
conversation we
brief
just
answers.
had. Yeah. We have some more here in my inbox, but these are all pretty meaty. And I'll start off asking about the topic of civil society. What can we as young people do to push for the revitalization of civil society? What are the most important investments to make? Politics, faith, education, etc.
I think it depends on where you are in life. Like when I rewrote the tax code in 2017, I made sure that as we got rid of loopholes, I kept the charitable deduction. That to me was extremely important. As we were closing all these loopholes to streamline the tax code, I made it actually more attractive as a result, the charitable deduction. Because where I was in Catholic life, applying my principles to the tax code, it's not necessarily good pro-growth economics, but it's good civil society policy, giving people the incentive to invest their private dollars into institutes, into civil society. So there was my kind of mark and role on it's a piece of legislation. If you're a young person as a student, what do? This Saturday, this Sunday, put the phone down and go get involved in some civic organization. Go get involved in some charitable organization. Go get involved with people that aren't like you, that gets you outside of your comfort zone, where you can bring your talent, your personality, and make a difference and just work with somebody. Big brothers, big sisters, anything like that. So get involved in your community, and by giving, you'll get more back in return. And you'll get that, and you'll build this muscle memory. By putting yourself into civil society and not focused on such social things or on your social mediums, you will build inside of yourself a muscle memory that it feels good to do this, and you'll make it contagious, and then you can spread it from other people. So that's what I would say is find that thing that you can do with other people that doesn't involve any electronics and gets you involved in helping other people in their lives.
Awesome. This question is similar in sense of religion and its role in public life. Since you touched on the pro-life subject, the question is, as a practicing Catholic, do you believe the question of fetal personhood should be addressed with federal rather than state legislation?
Well, so it's a good question of federalism, but life is such a high principle, especially in Catholic social teaching, that wherever you can protect life, you protect life. Because if you think, as practicing Catholics, we believe life begins at conception, and so therefore, you want to protect life as whenever you can. Now, in a civil society with civil debate, you realize lots of people don't agree with that. So then you don't have to be a stick in the mud and be axiomatic and insist on your way to the highway. Work to find the common ground. Work to find the common ground. We were just talking about Glenn Youngkin before here, governor of, because I think his foundation helped donate here. He found common ground with Democrats in the legislature last session and did a 15-week, first trimester. So find the common ground and get incremental steps toward life and bring people along. I come from the school of persuasive politics, not cram and jam politics, my way or the highway. And that means you have to work to persuade people, or at least find where you can find that Venn diagram where you can overlap. And that's, I think, particularly on a life issue, but I think that's what good Catholic social teaching teaches a Catholic in public life to do.
This next question involves consensus building as well. When voting in Congress for military wars, did you confer with your faith on the decision? Yeah,
there's a lot of writing on this in the Catholic churches. There's a ton of writing on this. They're called just wars. So the answer is yes, and there's a whole lot a lot of writing on this subject, which is the use of force by a military just or not? Good people can disagree on this. I got picketed by nuns every Wednesday for like 8 years because of Afghanistan and Iraq. Loved them, they're great, but we just disagreed on that particular one. So good Catholics can disagree on that. And I'm not just trying to but since this was a Catholic conversation, but there is a lot of writing on that. And the goal is, and I had to vote for a few wars. I've been to Afghanistan and Iraq more times than I can count on my hands, seeing the result of these wars. I used to carry a card in my pocket when I was in Congress. Every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine who lost their lives in my congressional district from these wars, 28. In my small congressional district of Wisconsin, 28 were killed in battle in Afghanistan and Iraq. I still have their names in my head. Went to their funerals. So when you vote for those things, those are the things you need to be able to look the mom, the dad, the wife in the eye and know that when you voted for that was still the right thing. Israelis are dealing with this stuff right now. So there's a lot of motion attached to that, and you have to have a philosophical moral construct in your mind as you make. That's what I meant when I say when you're making decisions in Congress, you filter them through your principles, and in something that's the most serious thing you ever vote for, frankly, I think. And you have to have a moral code that you have thought through when you make decisions like that.
And speaking of representation, this question gets at the difference between representing different groups and perspectives without falling into identity politics.
Give me clarity on that.
So how can one represent different groups and perspectives in such a fragmented society without falling into identity politics?
That's basically what I mean when I say I subscribe to persuasion politics, which is different than the kinds of populist politics we have. By saying persuasion politics, what I mean is my goal, if I'm advocating for a position that I hold near and dear to my heart, is to persuade you to agree with this position and to try and put it in the best possible light and persuade everybody to that position, not just a segment of the population, but everybody. And if you will slip into identity politics, if your belief is that only certain people can or should agree with me and not the others, and I'm going to do this in such a way that I'm going to wedge people. So if you have a universally held belief and principle and policy, that should apply equally to everybody. It should be just as important and just as relevant no matter who a person is. But if you fall into this thinking that this is red state, blue state, this is this person or against that person, and I'm going to devise my political strategy to appeal to just one segment of society for this idea, this policy, this belief, you're probably walking into identity politics. And honestly, in campaigns, this comes up. The campaign consultants do this. The campaign consultants will basically say, we can, I mean, you want to get the people who already vote for you to vote for you. And then you want to go and persuade the people who are persuadable to vote for you so you win. That's what elections are like. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about was when you conceive of a specific strategy that says, I want these people voting against those people. That's identity politics. And when you set up a strategy that does that, then you're intentionally setting people against each other. I want you to think I'm better than my opponent for being in office, and my ideas are better than my opponent's ideas. That's different than saying, I want you to hate him, and I want you to think I'm your vessel to get him. That's identity politics, and that's what we see a lot of these days.
And speaking of the red state versus blue state, one of the questions is a two-party system outdated?
It's so deeply built into our system, I don't think it is. I mean, look, 70% of Americans don't want Biden or Trump. So this is of a time when, you would think there'd be rise of something. Is there a third choice, please? This is it. A good Dallas guy, Ross Perot, was the last guy who sort of, it was Clinton versus Bush 41. He got 19%. That's probably the high watermark. I honestly don't see it. Because the way our bicameral legislature works, we're not a parliamentary system. And in parliamentary systems, which, by the way, I think are inferior to our system. I think our system is better than the parliamentary systems, and it is why we've stayed tethered to our Constitution for so long and so prosperous and so free as a result of that, which is written on the precipice of natural law. So very good thing. Parliamentary systems are coalition governments that can swing all over the place. And because we have a bicameral legislature with two parties, that makes it almost impossible for a third party to emerge. Because of the design of our legislative system, it makes it really hard for you to have coalition governments of multiple parties.
This next question has to do with the fragmented electorate, and it asks, can moral relativism and democracy coexist?
Well, it has been. It does. I think the question is, like I said before, I was talking to the ambassador to Australia just the other day. He's a guy I've known forever. He used to be their prime minister. And he's a left of center guy, and a guy named Kevin Rudd. And he said the Chinese, and he's a Chinese student. He's one of the world's foremost China watchers. And he says the Chinese are counting on us to relativize ourselves into self-immolation. They think we're just going to eat each other alive. What I'm seeing right now in this particular, I'm mentioning China, they're betting that we're going to tear each other apart. I'm betting that it's not going to be this year, but I'm betting that we're going to go through this ugly period where we're at each other's throats. This is the longest presidential election in our lifetimes, general election. We have never had both candidates picked this early in the process. It's going to be really unfun to watch TV, between now and November. And what's going to happen is problems are going to go unsolved. None of the big problems are getting solved right now. We got a debt crisis. Our bonds could start, after the interest rates are done being cut, it's really conceivable that in 2025, 2026, we will have failed bond auctions and the Fed may start, buying our bonds and monetizing our currency. I don't mean to get off into the economics point, but we could have a debt moment in the not too distant future. And we've got these political leaders doing nothing about it. Not only doing nothing about it, saying they're going to do nothing, promising to do nothing. And so what I think is going to end up happening, I'm kind of extrapolating off your question here, is we as Americans are going to get so sick of nothing getting done. We're going to be tired of hating each other. We're going to be tired of polarizing each other. We're going to be tired of politicians. I mean, Joe Biden's slogan is, I'm not Donald Trump. Donald Trump's slogan is, I'm Trump. You know what I mean? That's what this campaign is. I mean, that's it right there. There's really no agenda underneath. There's no solution. There's no contract with America. There's no, I'm going to solve these problems. Vote for me and I'll get it done. No, it's none of that stuff. We're going to get tired of this. We are. And that's the great thing about the regenerative power of democracy, of America's history, is I think polarization fatigue will set in and these problems are going to be starting piling and we're going to realize, you know what? It's going to get really ugly if we don't fix these problems. I can tell you what a debt crisis looks like. It hits the poor and the elderly the first and the worst. So I think we're going to get through this. And I think we will muster the stuff we need to muster to say, I'm going to reward the politician who's a unifier. I'm going to go for the politician who's inspiring, who's not trying to divide us, and who's offering solutions. It may not be the perfect solution. It may not be the most conservative solution or the most liberal solution, but it's a solution. And I think our politics, that's where the puck, I'm from Wisconsin, so I speak in hockey terms. That's where the puck is going to be. So the politician who skates to where the puck is going to be, I don't know, 2028, whenever, not now, it's for sure not now. I think that's going to happen. And I think we will beat relativism, which is winning right now, because relativism is identity politics. And it is being weaponized with digitization. I think we're going to get sick of this stuff. I think your generation is going to say, what the heck? My future is not what it ought to be in this country and what it historically has been, which is better than yours, Dad. That's the legacy of this country. Your kids are better off. We are severing that legacy. You all know it. But the good thing about this country, this is the last point I'll make on this, the great thing about our country is all of our problems are totally within our own capacity to be solved. We don't have to have another country do something for us. We can do it all ourselves. We can solve our social safety net problems. We can keep our social contract going and affordable and not have a debt crisis. We can get our economy growing. We can keep ourselves safe from terrorism. We can do all of those things within our own control. We just don't have serious politics right now. We get serious on politics. We get serious in civil society. We can fix it. I think we have the stuff that will regenerate. It's going to be your generation that's going to have to do it.
And speaking of digitization, I want to go back to the social media topic. Florida, I believe yesterday or this week, passed a law limiting social media to kids younger than 15 years old.
Yeah, I saw that.
And California and Arkansas have passed similar laws. Do you think this is one of the paths forward to limit social media?
We're going to be throwing spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. And I think that's what states should do. They should be laboratories of ideas to find out what works, what doesn't work.
And I'm not sure how much. Okay, I think last question, which gets to the core of the Faith and Learning program, is what advice do you have for college students who want to involve their faith in their career but not in full-time ministry?
Go to church on Sundays. Looking at my daughter there. I think get involved in your church groups, get involved in the youth groups, get involved in lay ministries. Just get involved. I'm Catholic, so there's a million things. Sure every denomination has so many cool things you can get involved in. We're at a Methodist school here, for heaven's sake. So get involved. And you know what? You'll find a whole bunch of young people just like you wanting to do the same thing, and you'll do a lot of cool stuff together.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker.
You bet. You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan and Dr. Kincaid, for an inspiring and challenging and motivating, I would say, conversation. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Garvin. I'm the chaplain and minister to the university, and I'm grateful to each one of you for being here and for your attendance and participation in tonight's symposium. In this election year, as we have discussed, when our country and world often feel irreconcilably divided, I'm grateful for a university and the people here who are committed to civil discourse and the free exchange of ideas. An institution that is deeply rooted in its Methodist and Christian tradition and compels us to offer our hearts and our minds to make the world a reflection of God's will. Before we leave this evening, I want to extend some gratitude, first to the whole Office of the Chaplain and Religious Life. This has been a team effort, but it could not have happened without the vision of Dr. Matthew Wilson, the director of the Center for Faith and Learning, whom you heard from earlier, and Jenna Stegmoller, who he mentioned earlier as well, who may be getting ready for the reception ready for you all right now. Thank you. And of course, we're grateful to Dr. Elisabeth Kincaid for her probing questions and her knowledge of Catholic social teaching that you brought to this conversation, and to Mr. Speaker Paul Ryan for your openness and honesty, and for what I heard you say, to live incarnationally, which is a Christian theology that distinguishes us from others, and to live life in real life. I appreciate that a lot. Finally, I want to thank every one of you for being here. We are committed to offering relevant programs that draw us into the intersections of faith and religious life and intellectual life. Everything we do as a Center for Faith and Learning is possible because of the generosity of donors. So you reminded us of your charitable donation tax law. You can take advantage of that, which the speaker created for us, or protected for us. There is a QR code on the back of the program, and if you want to be a part of future programs like this and appreciate this work, we would welcome you to join us in this meaningful mission. I'm going to invite the two of you to make your way out to the reception so that you can get something to drink and a sweet something to eat, and these folks can greet you when you get out there. So as I'm saying my last couple of sentences, if I'll let y'all walk out the door. And finally, you all are invited to linger as long as you would like. There, I believe, is champagne and desserts out in the atrium. You'll have an opportunity to greet Mr. Ryan and Dr. Kincaid. And again, we thank you all for being here, and have a good night and a meaningful Holy Week and Easter celebration.